Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the second part of our study in the parables in our ongoing series on the life of Christ. Luke chapter 15, we begin actually in chapter 15, verse 1. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near Jesus to listen to him, and then enter the second group, the scribes and the Pharisees. Began to grumble about how Jesus was receiving sinners. And that gives way to three parables. The first is a parable of lost sheep. This is a short story, a very short parable, about a shepherd. He has lost a single sheep, and he goes out and he continues to look for that sheep until that sheep is found. And then he comes home, he calls all his friends and neighbors together and says, "Hey, let's party. I have found my lost sheep." The second parable is of a lost coin. This time it's a woman. She has 10 silver coins. She loses one of them. She lights a lamp. She sweeps the house. She looks and looks and looks. And finally she finds her lost coin. And when she finally finds it, she says, "Hey everyone, rejoice. I found the coin that was lost." The third parable, now this third one is a longer story. This is one of Luke's longer story parables, and this time it is a lost son. So the first two short parables, when the lost sheep or when the lost coin is, when each of those is found, there's rejoicing. And similarly, in the story of the prodigal son, it is a story about a man who has two sons, and the younger of them asked for his family inheritance. That was a very disrespectful thing to do. It's like, I don't want to wait till dad dies. I wish he'd hurry up and do it. And so let me just have the money now. And he goes out and he spends it all on riotous living. And at the end of that, he sort of comes to his senses. You know, he's been reduced to poverty. He's taking care of pigs and even eating with the pigs, which for a Jewish person, that's about as low as you can get. And he remembers what it was like, and so he goes back home thinking, maybe I can ask and receive permission to be one of my father's servants. And his father sees him while he's still a long way off, and he has a speech all prepared. He's going to say, you know, "Father, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But before he has a chance to even do any of that, the father says, "Quick, bring out the best robe, put it on him, put the ring on his hand, sandals on his feet, bring the fattened calf, kill it, let's eat, drink, let's celebrate." So again, just like in the first two, there is rejoicing. When he returns, the father throws a party. But that's not the end of the story. The story then shifts to go from the younger brother to the older brother, because what's happened is while they are rejoicing, the older brother, he's out in the field and he's coming back home, and he hears the music and the dancing, and he says, "What's going on?" And he finds out about it, and he becomes angry. So the younger brother had left home, but here the older brother, he had stayed home. So he's been faithfully at home. The younger brother has been the prodigal son. The older brother, I guess we could call him the productive son. He has been there working, doing what he was supposed to do. The younger brother no longer felt worthy of the father's blessings. In contrast, the older brother feels that the father owes him a party, and the father has never thrown him a party. "What's wrong with the father?" he says. The younger brother has realized his sins. The older brother has an attitude of self-righteousness. You see, in the setting in which the story is told, remember the story is told because there were tax collectors and sinners, those that represented the younger brother, and they had been coming to Jesus, and Jesus had been accepting them, and now the Pharisees and the scribes, who see themselves as self-righteous, who see themselves as deserving of the presence of Jesus, they are upset with him. The younger brother had repented in the same way that the tax collectors and the sinners were repenting as they came to Jesus. The older brother resents in the same way the Pharisees and the scribes are resentful of Jesus receiving their younger brothers. Now he was saying, this is chapter 16. We go to the next story. Now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. A manager is not supposed to be doing that. A manager is supposed to be managing the money properly. And so the master, the rich man, calls the squandering manager, and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be manager." He's going to be fired. And the manager said to himself, "What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I can't work for a living. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes." And so he comes up with a plan to find patrons from those who owe his master money. He summoned each one to his master's debtors, and he began saying to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. I'm going to give you a discount." And then he said to another, How much do you owe?" He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said, "Take your bill and write 80. In each case, he makes a deal that won't be refused. And his master praised the unrighteous manager. Not because he's so honest, no, because he's not so honest, but because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons, and here's the point of the parable, for the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. It's not praising unrighteousness. It's not saying go out and cheat for a living, but act shrewdly. Make your investment count. Verse 9, "And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails," and it will, money has a way of failing, "they will receive you into the eternal dwellings." Take your unrighteous money and make it count long term. You see, if you're spending it on yourself, if you're spending it on stuff, you're only making short-term investments. To make a long-term investment, you have to spend it so that it will count for the kingdom, so that it will count for eternity. So, finances versus the kingdom. In the area of finances, that's somebody who's entrusted with little. In the kingdom, that's somebody who is entrusted with a lot. In the area of finances, we could call that, and the passage calls this, unrighteous mammon. Mammon is Aramaic for money. In the kingdom, that's where the true riches are to be found. In the area of finances, notice that belongs to another. You say, "Well, that's my money." Well, not really. It doesn't even have your name on it. It's got somebody else's name on it. It's got somebody else's pictures on it. It really belongs to somebody else. If you don't believe that, try stop paying your taxes. It does belong to somebody else. The kingdom is that which is given as your own. You want something that will last? Get the kingdom. No man can serve two masters. Either you're going to love one and hate the other, or else you will hate the one and you will love the other. What do you love? Do you love money? That's what you're going to get, and it will get you no further than this life. Do you love the kingdom? That will take you to the next life. Now, the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, see where they fit into this. They were listening to all these things. And they're not going for it. They're scoffing at Jesus. And he said to them, "You are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts, for that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God." You are trying to hold on to money instead of holding on to God. And you're trying to justify your actions, but God knows better. You may have fooled men. You can fool me because I'm easily foolable. You cannot fool God. The law and the prophets, is verse 16, the law and the prophets were proclaimed until John. Since that time, the gospel of the kingdom of God has been preached, and everyone is, our translation says, everyone is forcing his way into it. The kingdom of God is actually being forced upon. That is, there are forces at work against it, and there are those who use things like money to make way the fact that they have their first love as the kingdom instead of that money. What are you doing? What kind of force is at work in your life? Are you showing yourself to be a disciple, a follower of the kingdom, or are you all about getting and holding on to money? Money is very elusive. You can't hold on to it. It's slippery. It has they say money talks. Usually it says, so long, pal. Even if you manage to hold on to your money throughout this entire life, at the end of this life, you'll lose this life, and you'll lose your money as well. So, Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 18, talk about the parable of the unjust steward. Next, we're going to see another parable. We'll see the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, again dealing with a rich man with money and the lack thereof. In the first parable, the parable of the unjust steward, the context of that is the Pharisees who were lovers of money. Now we see a picture of a rich man who himself is a lover of money, and he comes to Jesus, and he is habitually dressed in fine linen, and he's happy, and he's loving life. And in contrast, there's a poor man who is eating the crumbs from his table, a poor man by the name of Lazarus. So, in the parable of the unjust steward, we see the picture of how the law and the prophets were proclaimed until John. Now, in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, here's a man who is rich. He lives a full, rich life. He dies and goes to hell. And in hell, he says, Lord, can you at least not send that poor man to warn my brothers? And he is told, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, even if someone rises from the dead. By the way, that's prophetic, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Jesus is going to rise from the dead. And those who did not listen to Moses and the prophets will not listen to Jesus either. Luke chapter 17, verses 1 and 2. He said to his disciples, it is inevitable that stumbling blocks come, but woe to him through whom they come. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea, than that he would cause one of these little ones to stumble. Now, is this talking about a new topic, or is this a continuation of the previous topic? I suggest that it is a continuation, that we are still talking about the issue of that which trips us up, and specifically the illustration is being used, the stumbling block of money. Be on your guard. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times a day and returns to you 7 times, saying, I repent, forgive him. So this is a call to forgive, to have an attitude of forgiveness. An attitude, can I say it this way? An attitude of generous forgiveness. Now, we've been talking about generosity with respect to money. Now it's generosity with respect to forgiveness. The apostles said to the Lord, I guess upon hearing this teaching, increase our faith. I think that's a great prayer, a great request. It's a prayer that I have often prayed. Lord, increase my faith. And the Lord said, if you had faith like a mustard seed, you would say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. That is, if you have faith, even a little will carry you a long way. A little bit of faith will do. They wanted more faith, and Jesus says, use the faith that you already have. So the apostles' request, give us more faith, and then we'll be able to give like we ought, we'll be able to forgive like we ought, we'll be able to do what we ought to be able to do. And Jesus responds first of all with a parable of a slave who serves his master. And that master is not obligated to thank the slave. The slave is supposed to do what he's supposed to do because he's a slave. give us more faith? Why don't you serve the way you were supposed to serve? And then you will do what you will be doing what you are supposed to be doing. That's the first response. The second parable is actually a living parable. It's not a parable at all. It's a story that Luke tells us, and it is about 10 lepers whom Jesus healed. And these 10 lepers, they go on their way, and they are healed, and they are just, really glad to be healed. But one of those lepers returns to Jesus to thank him. Now notice how that parallels with the previous parable. There was a story of a parable of a slave who serves his master, and the master doesn't have to thank the slave, but the slave ought to thank the master, and this is what takes place in the living parable. You've got 10 lepers who are healed. Only one returns to Jesus to thank him. All right, Luke chapter 18 now. Now he was telling them a parable to show that at all times they ought to pray and not lose heart, saying, in a certain city there was a judge who did not fear God and did not respect man. This is going to be the parable of the unjust judge. And there was a widow in that city, and she kept coming to the judge, saying, give me legal protection from my opponent. For a while he was unwilling. He didn't want to do the right thing, even though it was the right thing. But afterward he said to himself, even though I do not fear God nor respect man, I am not a just judge, yet because this widow bothers me, I will give her legal protection. Otherwise, by continually coming, she will wear me out. He responds to her request, granting her request not because he is good, not because he wants to do the right thing, but because she has continued to ask him. Notice how this is a parable showing from the lesser to the greater. He is very much the lesser. He is an unjust judge. And if an unjust judge will answer a request that keeps being made, how much more so will a just judge do that which is correct? That's the point of the parable. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge said. Now, will not God, who is a righteous judge, will not God bring about justice for his elect who cry to him day and night? And will he delay long over them? I tell you that he will bring about justice for them quickly. If the unjust judge would answer the request that was continually made, if we will continually make it, how much more will the just judge answer us in an appropriate manner? I tell you, verse 8, that he will bring about justice for them quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? See how this takes us full circle back to the question of give me more faith. And Jesus had said, well, use more faith and then you'll get more faith. And now the question, will the Son of Man find faith when he finally comes? That's a question for you to ask. It's a rhetorical question. Are you going to continue to be faithful in the absence of the Son? Because he is going to come back. Will he find you being faithful? So, unjust judge contrasting with the Lord. The unjust judge is unrighteous. The Lord, he is righteous. The unjust judge, he doesn't even know who the woman is. The Lord knows us completely. The unjust judge doesn't really care about the woman. The Lord cares about all of his people, all of his creation, and especially his chosen people. The unjust judge finally grants the needed help because of the woman's continuing request. The Lord will not be slow, but will quickly grant justice to his chosen people, to his elect. Now, he also told this parable, Luke chapter 18, verses 9 and 10. He also told this parable to some people who trusted in themselves, that they were righteous. So here's the theme we've touched on before. We're coming back to this theme of self-righteousness, and they viewed others with contempt. Here's the story. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And the Pharisee stood and was praying this to himself. Somebody remarked, well, that's all he was praying to. He wasn't really praying to God. He was just praying to himself. He thought he was praying to God. He said, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, swindlers, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector over here. You're so lucky to have me. I fast twice a week. I pay tithes of all I get. Aren't I wonderful? But the tax collector, standing some distance away, was even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. He recognizes himself for who and what he really is. He is a sinner in need of grace. I tell you, Jesus says, this man went, which man? The tax collector, the sinner, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. The one that finds forgiveness is the one who comes realizing his need for forgiveness, the one who comes in humility. On the other hand, the one who comes in pride receives nothing from the Lord.